When we talk about social cognition and social cognition development, we are facing to another level of complexity for brain development. I'm going to give you a better idea about how these processes are happening in the process of development. Let me start with a paradigm that we use in this field that would be something like a building block of the sense of causality and how kids start to have sensory processing, and that sensory processing would contribute at the end of the day to what we call social cognition. The idea of object permanence that comes from late Piaget research, and I'm sure you are all familiar with this idea. Let me just give you one video and give you a better sense about how this works, and then we will go for some specific technical details around that. So what we have here, we have a kid who is seeing a scene in an experimental site, and what they see is just, let me just show you what we have. Let me just mute it and show you what they see. What the kid is seeing is just seeing that a car is going into a path, and in the middle of the path there is an obstruction, so the kid could not see the middle of the path, but they know that there is a path behind, and then the machine would just go through that path, okay? And they can just remove the obstruction. You can see that, I mean, it's just something like several research assistants are putting those pieces together. So let me just bring it back. So because you can see here, people are, it's not something like a really advanced automated process, just few people are putting different pieces together trying to make that happen, and the kids are on the other side. So as you can see here, okay, this is coming, and the kid could see that there is something like a continuity in this process. And then, okay, what they do, they put an object in front of the path for kid, for kid, and then the car would not be able to pass the kind of the trail that is provided. And let's see what will be happening. And then they remove it behind the visual obstruction, and what we have, as you can see here, they remove it and let the kind of, and they just measure the duration of the time that the kid is just staring and just being surprised, because the kid is thinking that when they have an obstruction in their visual field, the object is still there, blocking the road, so the car shouldn't be able to just go through this path. And they just get surprised why the car is still able to go through the object without being stopped, while they do not know that they basically removed that kind of obstruction from the trail. So this is the way that they can measure. What they measure is basically the time that the kid would just taking a look into the scene, and they measure the amount of eye gaze that they have and the surprise that they have because of the concept of what we call object permanence that they have after the age of something like 6 months old. And this is the kind of good representation of that. So you can see that the kid is basically surprised what is really happening here, and why the car is still able to go past through the block. So this is what we call object permanence, which would be happening after the age of something like 6 years old, and they know that if we block something from, or we just remove something from the kind of visual field, the object is still there, and they just expect things that would be kind of interacting with the object that is still hidden but is still there. for being able to test that, the idea is if you put an elephant under a box, if we just put an elephant under a box, they just go and try to remove this box because they know that the elephant should be there even when they cannot see the elephant. But if you do this for a child who is less than 6 months years old, they cannot follow that. So they, as soon as you cover the object, they would lose their attention to that object and they would go and do something else. But the age when the kids would just get older, they realize that if you cover them, they still try to find that object under this cover, and they try to find their favorite, let's say, toy that is hidden here. And if you just do it in terms of put something here and just remove it from down the, let's say, this object and bring the elephant here, and kid would just try to find it under this, let's say, kind of hidden or the cover, and it is not there, and just you show that okay, this is right now here, they would just get surprised that why this elephant is not here as they have been expecting. And they really do not know that you are under this, let's say, experimental design in a way that you just remove the elephant from one cover and put it under another cover. So this is the way that you manage that. And they just get surprised, and you can evaluate their eye gaze, how they just get surprised regarding this exposure. This is called object permanence. And it could be assessed with other paradigms, things like what we see as habituation display. So we show this, and we show that, okay, this object is moving here, and there are two scenarios, one showing this and one showing this to the kids. And if we show this one to the kids, they would have more attention to this one, because it is something unusual to happen, that two pieces are moving and without having these kind of connections. But this is something that they are very expecting. Even when they have been seeing that there is a block, this is what they were expecting. So that is less visual attractive issue compared to this one. So they attend more to this one because they have something like what we call object permanence. And it is true for other scenarios in terms of, okay, if we show them this figure or this kind of scene, and we have two options. One, when we bring this piece of paper up, would stop here, and compared to this scenario that this plate would just come up and just go down, which is an impossible event. So that one attract more attention because of kids realizing that it's something like an impossible event to be happening when we have a solid object here, which is not supposed to be compressed easily with another object. So these are the things that they measure, and as you can see here, they can test that based on what we call an approach behavior. They can measure it based on the amount of time that kids would just have gaze or attention to it, or they can measure it based on even tracking their eyes. So it could be just, let's say, as I have mentioned, just motor response, the attention that they pay, or even the direction that the eyes are following. I mean, these are the different methods that we can measure these brain development processes in kids. There are some other paradigms. Now we get to more complex sensory processing regarding social stimuli. People realize that in different studies they have exposed kids to different versions of abstract faces, and they realize that even a 10-minute-old baby would have more attention towards anything that is close to a face without having attention to these strange combinations. So people think that it is not just about nurture. There should be a nature hardwire based gene related processes in the brain development happening before birth, that kids are more sensitive to things related to face compared to things that are not related to face. And so they they are being born with hardwired networks that are processing face, and those networks will definitely get more differentiated in the process of nurturing and being exposed to these pictures, or kind of daily exposure of having exposure to different faces in our entire life. But we still have sort of hardwired networks that are processing these basic elements of cognition. As I have mentioned, it is not just about the face. Even eye gaze could be perceived by a 10-minute-old baby, and they put more attention when you have an eye gaze towards them compared to the time that you are taking away your attention from them. And they can perceive that it is a more salient stimuli compared to this one. And that is amazing that a 10-minute-old baby is able to differentiate these two stimuli from each other. So you can see that the brain has hardwired tools even without any previous exposures to faces, realizing that there are some patterns in facial expressions are more salient and are more important for them for their survival, and they are being processed easily inside the brain even without any previous experiences. But in the process of development with age, this is a meta-analysis on different brain areas, and they showed that this figure is showing not only social cognition processes, but all different types of cognitive processes. They evaluated which part of the brain would have higher activation or higher involvement with higher age in different cognitive functions. They realized areas regarding the mainly prefrontal cortical areas would have higher involvement with increase in age, and they have more activations. Okay, just to kind of wrap up what we have in this process, let me show you some other brain pictures that, as I have told you, we need to be careful in terms of how to understand these pictures. But they have showed classic face, place, object, fMRI tasks to people trying to see how their brain would process these faces, places, and objects. As you can see here, place, as we have been discussing, parahippocampal place area that we know from before, and lateral occipital areas. These areas are involved in processing place and objects, even at the age of something like 5 to 8 years old. But at least based on their paradigm, their fMRI paradigm was not able to find areas that are specified to faces at the age of 5 to 8 years old. You need to be careful about how, as I have mentioned, that kids can perceive faces at the age of something like 10 minutes old, but they still might not have advanced face processing activations at the age of 5 years old to be reflected in fMRI in a way that we can measure that in fMRI, at least based on the studies that people have done so far. But when we go to a kind of an older age, at the age of something like 11 to 14, you have more activations, obviously, in the face-related area. So you can see that fusiform face area getting activated. Meanwhile, you can see that the areas that are involved in processing place and objects, they would be smaller. So the processes would get more fine-tuned in these areas, and you have new processes that are happening in the brain as well. So they can do the place processing areas with the smaller activations compared to large activations in early childhood. And then when you get to the adulthood, then being exposed to faces would also be related to activations in prefrontal cortical areas that we do not have in adolescence. So you can see that there are more complex cognitive processes happening when people start to see faces when they are in a kind of an older age. So there are more complexities in these processes at the older age. And to extend that, I'm just going to give you a few other kind of last remaining points regarding this issue with an experimental paradigm that we call it a still face experiment. I'm not sure, have you ever seen any still face experiment? But let me show you one of those experiments today. This is the idea. We have a mom. First, mom is playing with kid, and you can see that she's doing the interaction, and kid is also, let me just bring it back, and so you can see that they are interacting with each other. To see that just trying to show something to her mom, and how they are kind of doing eye contact to each other, kind of smiling to each other. Okay. And then mom is supposed to turn back and now bring her face back again without any facial expression. Okay, now let's see what the kid is doing. Even in the first few seconds, kids just get, she tries really hard to get her mom engaged again. What is happening? Just trying to get her mom engaged, being disappointed very much, trying to engage her again. No success, just screaming. Trying again. Even seeing outside, what is happening outside? Why this the situation is so weird? And then kids would start to just scream and cry and be really disturbed with the situation. And now mom is back trying to kind of restart the integration, and kids start to kind of be happy again, and they would start to interact with each other. So it's amazing to see the process, and you realize that even kids at that kind of really early stages of development, they have major issues in terms of how they can easily process the social interaction, and how they can be disappointed, and how they can get kind of frustrated with being neglected in this sort of social interaction, and how this neglect could negatively impact their brain development. And you can imagine that, I mean, in this case scenario, the mom would be back in just few seconds after that exposure. But you can imagine those families that, I mean, that is the constant interaction that they have with their kids in terms of just not paying attention to them and not interacting with them. So you can imagine how the brain would develop in a way that, I mean, they can be in trouble in a kind of really bad way in the future. The other important issue that I wanted to mention, and I think it's going to be critical in terms of the brain development, we know that brain is susceptible to stress. And it's amazing to see, based on all the developmental milestones that we have discussed today together, different parts of the brain have different, especially a special age for being vulnerable to stress. Hippocampus is very sensitive during age of something like 3 to 5 years old, amygdala 10 to 11, prefrontal cortex 14 to 16. So you can see that early childhood stress could make significant negative impact in the development of these areas in different ages. And you can see that how even the memory system or affective processing or control system, as you have learned during last couple of sessions, we have learned about all these important brain areas and how they contribute to the cognitive processes, how they can be affected by stress in different ages, and then how this negative effects could contribute to to different problems like substance use and lots of mental health disorders. This article has been published in Adversity and Resilience Science Journal. I'm one of the editorial board members here in this journal, which is a pretty much new journal in the field. And this is a work by Charles Nemeroff, one of the kind of figures, distinguished figures in this field. So people have tried to kind of explore those challenges. If you are interested to know more technical details about that, there is a really nice paper in Nature Review that they try to kind of put these pieces of evidence regarding the early childhood maltreatment and the effect of that on brain structure and function, connectivity. There are many pieces of evidence inside that are not really well organized in my understanding, as I showed you regarding the smoking and the effect of cannabis use on childhood development. But I mean, people try to kind of develop a better quality evidence in this field. But this is something that we are pretty much sure that there are significant negative effects of early childhood kind of maltreatment. There are pieces of evidence that there might be something like this effect in terms of a little bit of kind of adversity, not adversity, just kind of a hardship in early childhood might not have that much negative impact. But the higher level of, let's say, this is about brain, and this is about the level of, let's say, if I'm correct, yeah. So the higher level of adversity, these levels, would definitely have really negative impact on the brain development. There might be some kind of initial effects that a little bit of hardship might not have significant negative effect in terms of the brain development, but definitely we know that the higher level of adversity and higher level of traumas would definitely contribute to the decline in cognitive functions over the time. And there are still challenges for what would be the optimum point of giving a little bit of kind of hardship to kids to develop their own, let's say, powers and control to be able to gain things, but by their own effort, compared to the kind of putting them in the level of adversity that would make their life more complex. Okay, that is the end of this part.